When you retire.
Good evening. Welcome to the Monomoy Regional School Committee meeting for July 25th. We're going to call the meeting to order right at 7 o'clock. And the first order of business is approval of the January 11th, 2018 minutes. Any motion for that?
So move.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Ms. Stout?
I think it would be clearer if our notes in the future have discussion and just the voting information only where the action items are.
Okay.
That's just a suggestion.
Okay. Thank you. Any other discussion? All right. All those in favor for approval of the January 11th minutes?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? We have 2 abstentions, Ms. Long and Ms. Stout, and the motion carries. Next up is public comment. Is there anybody here for public comment? Seeing no one, we will move on to recognitions with Mr. Carpenter.
Just a couple things that are in your packet. First of all, I would like to congratulate our middle school Latin teacher, Sarah Kane, for an Excellence in Teaching Award that she has received. So there's a little blurb about Ms. Kane in your packet on a award that she received from the Classical Association of Massachusetts. And then in terms of a number of donations that were given to the school district, I would like to thank the Garden Club of Harwich for donating $500 for the Harwich Elementary Earth First project, $550.25 for the middle school for their pollinator garden, and from the Cape Cod Charitable Foundation, $500 for the middle school for their shellfish development program in conjunction with the Chatham Shellfish Department, $500 to the high school for the Best Buddies program, $500 to the high school for Miss Fiocra's morning snack program, $500 to the Harwich Elementary School for Fran Jorgensen's Mosaic Mirror Art Project, $500 to the Harwich Elementary School for Kate Serafini's pickleball program, and $400 for the Harwich Elementary School for Miss Chase's Sensory Solutions for Sensitive Kids program. And then I would like to thank the Chatham Cultural Council for $1,500 to pay for the admission and transportation costs of middle school students to attend the In the Heights musical at Wheelock Family Theater, $307 from the Chatham Cultural Council for the Museum of Science traveling program, Heat and Temperature, to enrich the middle school science program. And finally, $1,500 from the Chatham Cultural Council for the Big Apple Playback Theater to conduct 24 theater workshops for middle school students.
Excellent list. Thank you. And next we move into our reports and discussions. And first up was supposed to be State Senator Mr. Sear. Wow, that's very impressive. Shall we give him a moment to take a breath, or would you like to just jump right up onto the podium?
Sure.
Welcome on up. You heard me down the hall. Apparently I'm very loud. Welcome. How are
Thank
you?
I'm great. How are you?
Great, thank you. Thank
You
you
folks
for
have
coming.
had quite a workshop, right? I take it?
We did. We had a very educational workshop on evaluating our superintendent,
Wow.
which he's already left.
He ran out of the room
Apparently it was effective.
oh, that's great. Well, it's really nice to be with all of you here this evening. I'm Julian Sear. I'm the state senator for the Cape and Islands District, which includes both Harwich and Chatham, as well as all the communities from stretching from Mashpee to Provincetown, and then Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard, and the Elizabeth Islands. And what I've been doing, I think when, in coming into this position, I just finished my first year in this office. I think so many of the things that we do in state government end up coming right back here at the local level to be implemented. And so many of the things that you folks want to do in your town, in your community, in the district, go through Beacon Hill or go through ESE. And so in my first year, I made it a point to visit with all of our select boards of the 20 towns that I represent. And then this winter wanted to make a point to visit with all the school committees. And so we've been before Barnstable and DY, glad to be here at Monomoy. We'll be at Nauset and Mashpee in the island schools soon. I actually served on the Nauset School Committee when I was a student. I was a student representative, so I'm not a stranger to the really important deliberations of the school committee, of advocating for the schools, and I cut my teeth in politics. The first political thing I ever did was advocating for a 2.5% budget override to support the Nauset schools when we had pretty big budget cuts in 2003. So this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I just wanted to give sort of an overview of the education policy issues that we're grappling with a little bit on Beacon Hill. Present some other information around, I think, some health data, new data that we have related to the opioid epidemic, which I think is very important, and then get into conversation with you folks and see what questions I can answer and what homework you can give me. So, we have the sort of the biggest issue that's been talked about on education on Beacon Hill is looking at education funding and the funding formula that we have. There was a foundation budget review commission that was established several years ago that issued several recommendations around how do we make more. How does the Commonwealth more effectively and adequately meet the obligation that we have to our schools and our communities, but most importantly to our students? And so out of the Foundation Budget Review Commission, a series of recommendations were made. And there is, I'm glad to sort of walk through those. I think the piece that's important around education policy and education funding is that there seems to be a consensus that it's going to be hard for us to sort of tinker with the existing formula, right? It's going to be hard for us to redistribute the pie. But what we can do is expand the pie and give a little more for everyone else. And so I think that the thing to be looking towards, I don't expect there's going to be major significant legislation on education this session. There's been some efforts. There was an English language bill we passed in the fall. There'll be some other, the Senate passed a healthy youth bill that I was very involved in and supported. But I think the thing to look towards in this conversation about how do we expand the pie is what will be on the ballot initiative, the ballot in 2018, and that's the Fair Share Amendment, or the millionaire's tax, depending on your leanings. And this would have millionaires and billionaires pay a higher rate of taxation. This money would then go towards education and infrastructure, estimated to be anywhere between $1.6 and $2 billion. Actually, it actually may be more money just given the latest federal tax overhaul. And so I think this is going to prompt the conversation on Beacon Hill is sort of, all right, with this additional significant money, how do we go about expanding the pie? And the Foundation Budget Review Commission and the Foundation Budget Review sort of gives us a roadmap around how to look at that. That first and foremost is looking at health insurance costs to your schools. You're going to be getting into budget deliberations if you aren't in there already. The cost of health insurance just continues to be very significant for schools across the Commonwealth, and there's an effort underway to be like, how do we support that? Actually, in the FY18 budget, which we're in right now, there was a little extra money to support schools with that. The second piece the Foundation Budget Review Commission talks about is special education, and how do you really help schools, meet access and provide a fair level of education. This would be looking at changing the assumed in-district sped cost, which right now is assumed to be 15%, up to 16%. The other thing that I've been really trying to work on, and I support, is looking at the special education circuit breaker. So currently that is at, it's reimbursed at 65%. So for Monomoy, that's about $190,000 and some change. I'm advocating in the current budget to raise that to 75% for the special education circuit breaker, which would be $221,269. So looking at how do we expand support for early education. Back to the Foundation Budget Review Commission, looking at English language learners. the look bill that was passed around giving school districts, frankly, just more flexibility around meeting the needs of English language learners. I think we need to do more. The foundation budget review also looks at how do we measure needy and low income students. And so when we just use the metric of what students in your population qualify for certain benefits from the state, whether it's family benefits, welfare benefits, et cetera, that number tends to be lower than if you look at utilization from free and reduced lunch. And that's the case actually in almost all the schools that I represent. The free and reduced lunch number, there's much more utilization of that, and there's less utilization of welfare programs. So looking at that, and then the foundation budget review also looks at how do we enhance data collection, which I'm sure is a headache for your superintendent and principals and administrators, endless data collection from ESE, and then another piece around looking at statutory inflation. So Foundation Budget Review Commission, this is, this is what I would look towards. I think you'll see a flurry of activity and us taking up this effort in 2019, assuming the Fair Share Amendment passes. It currently polls at about 75 or 80%. I think a lot of folks seem to like the idea of taxing millionaires and billionaires. And that could change. Anything's possible in politics, but I think given the, I think that's kind of the environment that we have moving forward and looking towards the coming year. I think certainly I would really appreciate support, any feedback from the Cape around what priorities, of those areas, what are most important. If we're looking to expand that pie a little bit, what do we think is going to give our region a fairer shot? I think the other piece then too is that we can take this, Sarah Peak, myself, others in the Cape delegation, looking to see where commonalities are elsewhere in the Commonwealth, so we can work a little collaboratively on that. So I'm hoping to have a meeting or two, maybe three, before we get to 2019, so we can be really prepared. So certainly would welcome your feedback and participation on that. Getting back to healthcare, which has been a real priority, I know, for school districts from a cost perspective and budget perspective. The Senate took up a comprehensive healthcare reform effort in November. It's a pretty broad effort. If you look at our healthcare spending, we too have a budget problem, largely driven by our healthcare spending. 43% of the Commonwealth's budget is to our mass health program. If you include other health and human services activities, it's nearly 50% of our $41 billion budget is going to healthcare. This is not sustainable, and nor is the cost of healthcare for families here in Harwich, in Chatham, across the district I represent, and across Massachusetts, and the cost to employers. It keeps increasing and increasing. So there's a whole host of provisions that was done in this omnibus bill. Several provisions I think that are most beneficial to us here on the Lower Cape is the expansion of telemedicine services, and also the expansion of what EMTs and paramedics what services they can provide and what they can be reimbursed for. That's going to be really helpful in towns like Harwich and Chatham. And then a whole host of other efforts at looking at the variation of price across the system. It's quite wonky, and I'm glad to get into it if you like, but I think know that this is something that we hear, and I really hear, that healthcare costs are drowning our school districts, our families, are burdening our businesses, and this is something that we're working on, and I'll be continuing to work on this. This is a space that I've been working on from a policy perspective in the Senate. The other piece that I want to mention, and I believe that the Monomoy system is on, you folks get your health insurance through the Cape Cod program, but for retirees in the system, or in your former districts, may receive health insurance with the GIC. The Group Insurance Commission released a proposal that essentially shrinks from having 6 carriers to 3. It's quite controversial. A lot of folks are not happy about it. Sarah Peak and I are insisted that the GIC come to Cape Cod. They weren't going to come to Cape Cod, but insisted that they come here, and they're holding a hearing tomorrow in Hyannis. It's going to be from 2:30 on at the Hyannis Youth Center definitely want to encourage particularly retirees to chime in on that. And then I just wanted to mention two other pieces related to education. I think time and again I hear, and I think most of us who are living in our communities hear or are living the challenge of how profoundly unaffordable our communities have become, how costly our communities are to live in, largely driven by housing. And for young families, the lack of childcare options, the fact that we don't have universal pre-K systems is something that's a challenge. My predecessor actually worked on this issue. This is something that I think I'd like to see us renew. I'm sure you folks have actually been working on this as well. But however I can support universal pre-K in our communities, I think this is something we can do. There's different models here, whether it's a voucher program, whether it's establishing programs within the school systems. Certainly we have providers that are in our districts or within our communities already. But I think when we look at families who are trying to make ends meet in Chatham and in Harwich, childcare is something, especially for folks who are working full-time. Childcare is something I think we can help with, and early education is something I think we can help with. And then I just wanted to highlight some information as it relates to the opioid epidemic, which I think is quite relevant to our schools. So we're in about, I should say my background is as a public health person. I worked at the Department of Public Health for 6 years prior to this position. So I like to really kind of sink my teeth into epidemiology and health data. We're in about year 14, 15 of the opioid epidemic here on Cape Cod, a little longer when you look in New England and nationwide. So Barnstable County, the health department did this really smart look back at death data, looking from 2004 to 2014, a snapshot of saying, all right, what can we learn about the several hundred individuals who died of opiate overdose? What commonalities can we find about them, right? That can guide our interventions and our prevention work. How do we more aggressively respond? If you look at opiate overdose, the rates of opiate overdose are actually decreasing statewide. That's not happening here on the Cape. On the Cape, it's plateaued at best, if not is continuing an increase. And so what this information found, if you looked at, so from 2004 to 2014, there were 281 individuals who died of an overdose, of poisoning by opioids, either heroin or pills. So 281. And what's really interesting, if you look at that population, is of those 281 individuals, 69% of them have a high school education or less. So meaning these are what we would call straight to work. If they are students in our school systems or people who are growing up here who are, or folks who are moving here who have a high school education or less. So they're not the students in our system who are going on to college, either the community college or off Cape. They are folks who are going straight to work from high school. And then of that, again, that 281 number, over 65% of them are employed in services and trades, which I think is something that wouldn't be surprising for us given what our economy is here. But 1 in 4, 25% of them are employed in construction. And so from a risk perspective, I think this county data is really, I think in part tells us something we know, but I think really highlights that when you look at who's most at risk for opiate use and then ergo opiate overdose leading to death, if we look at what's happened here in Barnstable County for a decade, it's young people in our community who only have a high school education or aren't even graduating out of our high schools, though I am aware of the pretty robust programs that we've got across the Cape to get folks to graduate. So they're folks with a high school education and they're in services, but primarily construction. And I think that information, from an intervention and prevention perspective, I hope is helpful. Certainly the county has a much more thorough presentation on this data, and I encourage either the school committee or relevant folks in the district to reach out to them. I think it's important, given that you look at how this epidemic's behaving, it continues to impact our communities and impact our young people. And so I wanted to just share that information. And I've been sharing it with all the school committees because I think it's compelling. If there's anything that I can do or my office can do, certainly on this issue, we're going to be taking up the governor has filed proposed legislation, and the legislature will be acting on this legislation. Essentially, it's a opioid 2.0 bill in the coming months. If there are specific programs, initiatives, policies that you think would help prevention and intervention work here in the Monomoy district, whether the high school level, the middle school level, the elementary level, please be in touch with me, let me know. I'm actively soliciting ideas and thoughts around what we can do on this. And then of course, more broadly, would love to hear, take any questions from the committee, hear what issues, are on your mind, and how, we can I can support what's just a tremendous school district, and just a wonderful, wonderful community that's been built between these two towns. So thank you.
Any questions for Ms. Stubb?
I have question, comment, and that is, with the change in our starting schedule for elementary school, starting earlier, we have our children getting out of school that are at elementary level at 2:30 instead of 3:30, and no older siblings are there to help take care of them. And you mentioned the thing about childcare. It used to be kind of onerous for schools to be saying anything about, because we're the educators, not the childcare people, but we have the kids here at 2:30, and so I don't know if other schools are thinking about this, but it's expensive. It's very expensive for the parents to take up that time from 2:30 to 5:30, say. So I don't know if there's any grants or funding that could be provided. The kids are here, maybe some programs should be here that can be defrayed without the parents having to foot a large bill for it. It's just a thought.
No, I think that's a great observation. There's been a real push, and I've seen this, when I was in high school at Nauset, I think we were done by like 1:40 in the afternoon, and now when I come to the schools, as I often do, and the high schools, it's like, wow, they're still going. It's 3 o'clock, 3:30, and there's been that's a policy I think that's going to be driven around trying to be responsive to behaviors and biology and a whole host of things. I'm not familiar with, but I will ask first whether or not the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education has any guidance or assistance on that for schools. My hunch is they don't. I worked pretty closely with ESC when I was when I worked at the Department of Public Health, so I can appreciate many of the dynamics there. I think that I'm not familiar with sort of direct sort of grant programs or anything. What we being very honest, it's such a fight for us just to sort of give you folks what you get from the state. But I think that really merits further discussion, conversation. How do you do that? And with the changing times and lengthening the school day, certainly there's workforce considerations in that, a whole list of costs as well. But I think, you do have, these remarkable community resources, which are these school buildings, which are here and which hopefully, and many of them are being used by the community. So how do you thread that needle and how you do it?
Right.
I don't know, but I can keep thinking about it and looking into it.
Because it's not really a school issue, it's not a school funding issue so much. It's really a community needs issue. But we happen to have the children.
Yes, and in being honest about where we provide support for children and families, we actually provide very little support broadly. And the only place that we really do that is our schools. And so we just, from a legislative perspective, from a policy perspective, from a societal perspective, we just keep asking schools to do more and more and more and more. I don't know if that's fair per se, but I also think this is the location where you have a captive audience, and so how do how do you at least make sure that you're following up that with something really meaningful? I don't know, but it's,
We agree on the problem.
yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sharon.
Mr. Russell?
Thanks for coming, Julia. We should make this kind of a yearly thing. You're so informed, and we're down here on the peninsula, so it's good to hear from our senator.
Glad to.
And thank you for not asking us who we voted for, so that was good, too.
I don't think that's legal, no, I don't think that.
No.
And I
No one would ever ask that. A question.
Yep,
You mentioned this millionaires potential tax, and if it passed in 19, you then went on to say there are 5 or 6 areas you were interested in to see maybe that extra sum could be channeled, which I think would be great. Exclusive of Chapter 70, would you, if this does come to pass, would you, DSS, be contacting the superintendents throughout the 351 communities to say, what do they think about funding this amount of funds? Because we're short of money, not only just the 4 circuit breakers, et cetera, but clearly we could find ways in which, and probably the best bet would be to contact the superintendents in the
Yeah.
regions and ask them, if it came to pass, where do you think this chunk of money should be targeted to lift up some of these kids to another level of rigor?
so the 6 or 7 things that I went through are actually part of recommendations that were convened from this Foundation Budget Review Commission, which included a whole host of education stakeholders, including superintendents, teachers, unions, state agencies. But, so what I can do is I can make sure that you have a copy of the Foundation Budget Review Commission, and then if you folks have specific ideas, let us know. There's a proposal to take these recommendations, which were done sort of by, you bring together a commission, a panel to come up with best practice recommendations. Whether or not the legislature adheres to those recommendations is often kind of the unknown piece. There is a push among some folks, and I'm supportive of this actually, is to basically pass a law that would say, all right, if this money comes to pass, we're committing ourselves to spend this money to education and to spend this money towards this Foundation Budget Review Commission. That isn't guaranteed, and the legislature and the administration has I don't want to call it a bad habit, but a history of reappropriating dollars that may be sort of assigned for one, it may be passed and enacted for one thing, and we use it for something else. I mean, now sometimes that's necessary because you have a recession and a whole host of things. So I'd like to, from my perspective, I think if there's going to be a ballot initiative asking taxpayers to, or asking citizens to change how we go about taxation, and it's going to bring in new revenue, I think it's a good thing to be transparent and say, all right, hey, if you pass this, here's what we're going to use the money for. So you got a sense of what we're going to use the money for. I think that in the Senate, there's more support for this. I'm unsure about that support in the House. But certainly welcome any ideas and thoughts that you would have on that. And I think also part of the piece why I'd like to convene, a working group among the various school committees in the various districts in the next year, maybe 1 or 2 meetings, maybe 3, just to take a look at the Foundation Budget Review and say, all right, of these 6 or 7 recommendations, which would make the most difference for your districts, and also what's left out. So what's left out of Foundation Budget Review, there's no talk of regional transportation funding for school districts, which is a huge issue that we're always sort of fighting on. So that's my intention in raising it. Those aren't priorities that, the priorities tend to make sense from my perspective, but they're priorities that were recommended by a group.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Russell.
Any other questions or comments or anything? Ms. Stout?
I think this might be the first time any representative has come and asked our thoughts on anything.
I think so.
Thank you.
No, Sarah's visited us.
Sarah's definitely.
comes-
Yes,
Yeah.
she
Sarah's come to
visits,
talk to us.
and that's wonderful too.
Yeah.
But I really appreciate you asking for feedback, not just sharing.
Thank you. No, and really appreciate Certainly getting to work with Representative Peak, who
Yes.
is just a wealth of knowledge and also who's really risen in the ranks in the House, which is a much more parochial, bigger place. And so her success is our success, and it's great to partner with her and actually the whole Cape delegation. I think in this, we're in a pretty toxic political moment nationally, and that's not what my job is like every day, serving with the fellow folks who represent Cape Cod, the islands. We're a bipartisan delegation. We have Democrats and Republicans, but 9 out of 10 of the issues that we face are not partisan ones, and we work really collaboratively in that. Just personally, but also I think for the region, that's something that gives me a lot of encouragement and hope when I don't feel that way when I tune into the national news. So, thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you for coming.
Appreciate it.
Perfect timing. All right, so then we will move on to our next item, which is network and wireless update for elementary schools. Mr. Birchfield? Somebody's coming along shortly? Maybe? Let me
Hi,
give
everyone. Katie Isernio, Business Manager.
sorry,
And-
Ms. Isernio is going to do it.
Yes, so, and Jim will certainly chime in on any of the technical aspects, but this is kind of more informational from a procurement standpoint. I sent along in the packets information about E-rate, and it's important that we have that knowledge of the E-rate program, and then also one of the things about the wireless upgrade ties directly to our FY19 budget, the capital improvement budget. So that's why we're kind of doing this together. E-rate program is, supports schools and libraries, and it's really to make sure that schools and libraries are, infrastructures can support technology. And there's been a big push lately, and the funding has increased, and it's really, the emphasis is towards the category of upgrading your wireless infrastructure and your connectivity in, as I said, in the schools and the libraries. And when you get your, exactly the source, I think it's your telephone bill and your cable bill, there's a federal tax, it's like point something or other, and a penny of that goes into this big pot of money. And there are millions of dollars, and there's a criteria by which you fill out to apply. So we're in a category that for Chatham Elementary and for Howard Elementary, for the upgrade that we're proposing over the summer, we're looking to get 50% reimbursement for that. So Jim and I have been working for months, and we have an E-rate consultant that we work with. Her name is Nicole O'Neill. And we put together some very thorough bid specifications to upgrade the wireless at Howard Elementary and Chatham Elementary. And it's really, really of a sense of, not urgency, but of importance because of all of the computerized testing and everything that we're doing at those two schools, and the number of devices that are, being used at the same time. So we worked with our E-rate consultant, we went out to bid, and we had six vendors that bid on this job. And the bids ranged anywhere from, $154,000 all the way up to $253,000 for the same work to be done. I think that if you don't mind, Jim, if Jim could just talk to you a little bit about just what the upgrades will look like, and then that's part of the capital improvement line in our FY19 budget. And we only budget for the 50%, because the E-rate will just send the balance to the provider that is awarded the contract. So what are we upgrading?
Jim Birchfield, Director of Instructional Technology. And the upgrades will consist of brand-new switches at Harwich Elementary. And just to kind of give you an overview of how all this works, our internet connection comes into the school and then goes into what's called a core switch in one of these rooms called the head-end room. And then from the core switch, all of the cables plug into that and go to either another closet that has another switch or to the classrooms where teachers can plug in a computer to a jack, that kind of thing. So it's all part of the main network infrastructure of the school. So the switches are extremely important, so those will all be upgraded. And then we're going to run new cables from the main switch closet to the satellite closet. So we have a head end room, and then we have several closets. We call them IDF closets. But regardless, we need to run cable from each closet to the other closet. And that will be upgraded fiber optic cable, which is really important because we need to sort of get ourselves prepared for whatever changes are coming in the future in terms of internet speed especially. So we're trying to make sure that all the cabling we have in between each of the switches is up to snuff. And we want to make sure we have something that will last for a long, long time into the future as the speeds improve on the internet. So we'll be replacing all the fiber optic cables within the building, and then also we're going to run 2 cables to each classroom for new wireless access points in each room, and then an extra cable for any other kind of connection, say a teacher's laptop that we might need. So those 2 cables should provide plenty of connectivity to each of the classrooms. And at Harwich Elementary, I believe we have 60 new wireless access points that will go into the building. And at Chatham Elementary, we have about 40. So essentially, we're going to have 1 access point per classroom in each of the buildings. So that should cover both buildings really, really well, and make sure that we've got plenty of connectivity when we roll in a cart of Chromebooks, or at some point when all the kids K-12 are one-to-one Chromebooks. They'll all be connected. So, but anyway, we've really thought this all through. We've worked with different network engineers to sort of analyze what we've got and what we need, and we feel like we've really come up with a plan that will sort of, I call it future-proof the district well into the future. And it looks like we've got a nice bid that came in, and I think it would really, really take care of any of the issues we might be having with connectivity at the 2 schools.
And what's also great is that then all of our schools will have been done. We did the Harwich the Monomoy Regional Middle School 2 summers ago, and obviously we have the new high school, so that all of our buildings will be well connected. And then this work will be done, and the contract will be awarded to start on July 1st and to be done by the end of August, and which is why we wanted to talk to you about it tonight. We have the bid awards. We don't need to necessarily vote on awarding the contract this evening, but we wanted to just give you the information about the E-rate and how it is, because it's a big ticket item, but it'll be amazing to get rid of any kind of hiccups that we currently have when we're doing some of the testing in the schools. So I don't know if anyone has any questions about this exciting world of technology.
Any questions? So I just have a quick, you said the lowest bid was about 150,000?
$154,943 about.
About 150,000.
Yeah.
And so in the line item, we're only gonna put in the 77,000.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because you don't have to apply for a grant, it's the E-rate just automatically, as long as you say we need it.
Well, it's quite a process, because it's with the
It's not
federal
just saying
government.
we want it, give it to us, and we're
So
done.
it's actually called a Form 470 that we had to file through to the, with the E-rate. And it's a very complicated form, and to file that 470, we had to have all of the information, how many access points, how many linear feet of cabling. So we had all the specifications. So at the same time, because Massachusetts has more stringent procurement laws, if we were in some other part of the country, you might only have to do that 470 form, but we have more stringent procurement laws. So then we went out to bid So when we did our 470, we had to tell people they need to submit a sealed bid, not just call Jim and do that. So then, when we got the approval that our 470 has been accepted,
Okay.
which we got the green light that was okay. So now what we have to do is provide information on the vendor, who also has to be a registered E-rate vendor. And then when they get that, then we will get an award notification from the E-rate program that you have gotten X number of dollars. It's
Okay.
about $150 a student, but there's a cap and there's different categories, like X number for cabling, X number for wireless access points. So it is about 50%. That's, we've only budgeted the 50%.
Okay.
And then, as I said, you have a choice whether you want to budget the whole amount and then get the check back, but it's really much easier to just have the vendor be paid directly once it's invoiced. The vendor gets the money directly from the E-rate program, and then we only have to pay our portion of that.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We did that with the middle school.
Yeah, and the middle school was an E-rate program as well.
Okay.
Because what they've done is they've shifted, it used to be telephones and computer. The telephone has gone away in terms of getting E-rate funding for telephone upgrades.
All right. Thank you very much. So we'll look, I'm sorry, Mr. Duval.
The vendors, people that we've worked with in the past with some of the other infrastructure changes?
We've worked with this vendor in a different capacity, more the lowest responsive and responsible bidder that put up some of the,
They did all the AV equipment here,
Yeah.
not the TV.
So we have
studio.
history.
yes, yeah, and I checked the references too, and they were stellar. So,
All right. Thank you.
you're welcome.
And next on our agenda is a high school civics first approach discussion report. Hello, Mr. Burkhead.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Bill Burkett, principal at Monomoy High School. I'm here tonight with some exciting news to share with you and what we think is a new visionary program for us in civics education for our 8th grade students. And just to provide a little context, last year we made some changes in our graduation requirements and program of studies that have worked out remarkably well, which at the end of the school year I'll share some of that data and that supports that change, so I want to thank you for approving that. Part of that conversation last year involved the importance of civic education for our students and that we value it, and that was from the school committee, teachers, and community members. So we all agree on that. So I promised to go back and work with our teachers, our outstanding social studies department, and put our collective minds together and looking to see what direction the state was going, because the state at the time was working on new standards and direction, and they've just recently shared some information which aligns nicely with what we're moving to, so we'll be ahead of the curve in that respect. So it's pretty exciting for us, so we wanted to get out in front and share that with you this evening. So I brought two of my superstar colleagues tonight to help with this. The first one is Mr. Mike Martin, our assistant principal. He's been with us for 3 years. Mike's done a fabulous job, and some of his background and claim to fame is that he was a longtime 8th grade social studies teacher. So this is right up his alley, and taught some of this that he'll speak of, so he's the right guy to have present this this evening. He was also taught both of my children in 8th grade in social studies. They're both in college now, and to this day, he is still their favorite teacher. So an outstanding educator. And one more thing about Mike, so I embarrass you a little more, but his credentials are stellar, is that I hired him when I was an athletic director back in the day to coach our girls' tennis team, which was on the verge of expiring, and we didn't have enough kids out for the program. He rejuvenated it to have over 30 girls on the team and win multiple championships in a matter of years. So just great with kids, great with people, outstanding educator, and outstanding social studies teacher with a history of this. So he had involvement with our social studies department in coming up with this concept and idea and curriculum. Along with him is Jen Police, our guidance counselor extraordinaire and guidance director. Jen's also been here for 3 years, quickly moved up the ranks to our guidance department head. and running our guidance department, which has really transformed a lot of what we do in our school, and it's kind of the nerve center of the school. And Jen's claim to fame, I would like to think, is that she was a recent student of mine in the Bridgewater State CAGS program, and received, if I don't mind sharing her grade, was a solid A plus, teacher's pet, and she was outstanding. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Martin and Ms. Police. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction, Mr. Burkhead. I think one thing you did leave out, which I think is very important about tonight, is I was not a U.S. citizen until I passed the citizenship test, which is part of the presentation. But so this is not a communist plot to try and get this form of U.S. government and civics in. I grew up in Scotland, and 3 years ago, I went to the State House and took my citizenship exam. And the great thing was the course that I was teaching, civic history at the time, the final for Jake Burkhead, Mr. Burkhead's son, was the citizenship test, and I did pass, and now I'm allowed to stay here. So, and Jake passed as well. So currently, if you look at our slide, we have what we're doing on the left-hand column, and what we're looking to do moving forward in the right-hand column. So, World History 1, World History 2, US 1, 2, and a government elective in 12th grade this year. And really the only changes that we're making is introducing civics. Now, there's some discussion about the name. I know we've thrown out civics first. I know we have a physics first program as well. So the state are calling it US and Massachusetts Government and Civics, which is, very exciting. So the name discussion will continue, but we have U.S. government and civics. What we're looking to do is in 9th grade have a 1-year world history component, and we're looking at 1500 to the present. Obviously next year's 9th grade, our current 8th graders, will continue with World History 2, and then 2019-2020 we'll go to that World History 1 component. So why study civics in the 8th grade? So a lot of this research comes from the committee that spearheaded the change really statewide for high schools. And a couple of weeks ago, DESE came out with the revision of the 2003 History and Social Science frameworks, and the recommendation was, and I quote, a full-year course at grade 8 providing a thorough study of civics. So that's pretty much a rousing endorsement from the state. The great news as well is we can, when our kids come in the door, rather than, in the past we're waiting till 12th grade until they either took government or now it's an elective, we're now putting civics first in 8th grade. There is a civics collaboration currently at Monomoy, and it's the Project Citizen project that you may or may not be familiar with. I will discuss that later in the presentation. But they came up with some information that students who experience effective civic education, and these are their plus points, they're more likely to vote, which is a great thing. Discuss politics at home. I don't know if that's a positive or not, definitely not in my household, but that is definitely a plus. 4 times more likely to volunteer and work in community issues, and they're more confident to speak publicly. Also, the research has shown that schools with strong civic learning programs are more likely to be safe, inclusive, and respectful. Now, they discuss this effective civic learning, and they actually come up with 6 best practices that they've identified from schools statewide and nationwide, and I'll just kind of run through them. One is instruction in government, history, economics. The other, discussion of current events and controversial issues, which our social studies department are doing those currently. I think with the civics program at 8th grade, when we have election years, When we have ballot initiatives, you heard about that tonight from our state rep, and this will be the venue to have a full discussion in school about these issues. The other service learning projects, and I did mention Project Citizen, and I'll touch base on that a little later, but extracurricular activities. They talk about not only are they getting explicit instruction, but also experience in civics. And we do have a lot of extracurricular activities for students to exercise their civic mindedness. We have, for clubs, we have mock trial, we have We the People. For school governance, we have our student council. We also have our school council with student representatives, and also simulations of the democratic process. And I know with Project Citizen and mock trial and We the People, that's important as well. So the new syllabus, the new curriculum for this civics course, again, we have 7 units up here, and the course that I taught was a civic history course where you really traced the development of the American system of government using the colonial experience and the revolution through the Constitution as the vehicle to explore that. There is more of a push in looking at Massachusetts and local government, and that really ties in nicely with the Project Citizen project, which is really an exercise in the applied Constitution. So we learn application of what the students are learning in the civics course. They do really a term-long project, a group project, present it to some folks here at school, and then hopefully present it up at the State House and compete against other schools. So I do have some links here that I can share with you. I do want to show really the kind of jewel in the crown at the end of the year is this Project Citizen project. And currently we are doing this. It is a collaboration between our social studies and our English teachers in the 8th grade. They do it on both teams. And it was something they did at Chatham, something I did in Plymouth. I know Mr. Burkett's kids did it. And it is such a fantastic project in that students now get a voice and they can really impact legislation and really get heard and be a force at their school. The best project we did in Plymouth was we were serving our school lunches on styrofoam containers, and our students, they looked around, they actually went home, and one of the first parts of Project Citizen is you have to go home and ask your parents, what are some of the problems that we have in our town? So you can imagine, after we have some potholes outside our driveway, that's probably not something you want to focus on for an entire term. So it's something really that is student-driven. Even though teachers may have some great ideas, we really focus on something that students get interested in. So, long story short, the students in my class, they interviewed our food service manager, and lo and behold, the reason we use styrofoam is because it was a lot cheaper than the alternative. So, after about 6 months, we finally moved over to some melamine hard plastic trays, which were a lot more environmentally sound and better for your health. But the great part about this project as a teacher is it's almost like a flipped classroom where the kids are teaching you. So I had 5 different projects for each of my classes, and they really competed against each other. And some of the best projects would go to the State House, and they go to a national showcase as well. So I can really do Project Citizen. I have a little video here for you, which will definitely do more justice than I. So it is a 13-minute video. I'm going to play 3 minutes. So.
learn to become good citizens because without the people contributing to our society, we won't really have a society that we want to live in.
We the People Project Citizen is a curricular program for elementary, middle, and high school students, as well as members of school and community-based organizations.
Project Citizen is vital to the health of a democratic society. Citizens need to learn how to engage, but equally important, they need to know why they need to engage in order to be heard, in order to have a voice in our system of government. And what we're trying to do with young people is to teach them both their right to engage with their elected officials and others in authority positions, but also to recognize the responsibility that comes with that.
Project Citizen promotes competent and responsible participation in local and state government.
And if we can, make a couple of phone calls. Maybe 2 or 3 of you can go visit him or her at their district.
We can each make a difference in our community if we try and keep going.
Project Citizen is a good way to teach civics because what it does, it teaches each individual child the steps you can take to have your voice heard.
Hi, my name is Tim Combs. I'm going to be introducing the community policy.
Implemented throughout the United States and in more than 70 countries worldwide, Project Citizen helps students learn how to monitor and influence public policy.
You kids have really made a difference in this, and I want to personally thank you for doing it.
Through the Center for Civic Education's Civitas International programs, partner organizations adapt and translate Project Citizen materials to their own national context, provide professional development, and hold showcases at the local, regional, and national level.
Among the 2 topics which we have chosen are the stray animals and the child labor.
Project Citizen involves students applying the principles that they've learned in their civics classes and their history classes into real-life action.
Florida is no longer known for its sunny beaches or its beautiful weather, but for its pain pennies. We are the pill mill capital of the United States of America.
Entire classes of students work cooperatively to identify a problem in their community that requires action by the government, research the problem thoroughly, analyze and evaluate alternative policies, develop a public policy proposal to address the problem, and create an action plan to enlist local or state authorities to adopt their proposed public policy.
And you can feel how all the laws are pulling on you.
So I will share this link with you, some really good resources there. It's a great program. I did it for 9 years. Our 8th grade teachers currently do it, and it's a much better fit with the civics program than it is with with World History 1. So it's a real much better fit because they're learning about these principles of being an involved citizen, and then they're really applying these principles as well. So to give you an idea of what the Project Citizen projects were currently at Monomoy, last year students in Mr. Matheson's class were researching having Narcan in schools. And when I worked in a 6th through 8th grade middle school. And in the 8th grade, oftentimes, as you know, when you're dealing with elected officials and you're waiting on decisions, it takes quite a while. So we were always kind of stymied that if we had a really good project, and come June, and the kids go off to another high school, it kind of falls flat. But just last week, there were a couple of students from Mr. Matheson's class who no longer have him, but they are going back during their JAWSOM time and working on following through with their project. So just the proximity of having the 8th graders in here and staying the entire time is really teaching those civic habits, which is great to see. Some of the others, we have school start times is very popular in a lot of districts, and I know Ms. Barnes' class looked at this years ago, and lo and behold, we got it implemented. Also, a smoking ban in beaches and parks was implemented through Project Citizen, and also the community center in Chatham, which was dilapidated a few years ago. There were some funds to overdo that. I didn't know about that, but I'm sure some people that live in Chatham could probably attest to it. So, to to kind of sum up, Project Citizen is a better fit, but also we're definitely going to be ahead of the game here as DESE's recommending that full year of civics in 8th grade, and we're really on board to kind of move ahead and jump on this. So, thank you.
Any questions? Mr. Russell?
Great overview, thank you.
Thank you.
And I think I missed it a bit earlier on, the grade 8 option with the government civics course as it's going to be implemented, what would be the time frame again?
We're looking to implement this starting in the fall.
This coming fall?
This coming fall. So there is, we have Mr. Dixon, our current government teacher. He's actually moving to the 8th grade because that's really his wheelhouse, and he's going to be working with Mr. Matheson. There's going to be some training, obviously, but we're looking to push ahead this fall.
Just to follow up, what type of budgetary response do you need from the central office to purchase materials? Or
I know I spoke with Dr. Blanchard. We're kind of researching a textbook right now, but just, some staff PD. I know there's a training for Project Citizen that Mr. Matheson and Ms. Barnes has gone to, but I think Mr. Dixon would have to go to that. But I know Project Citizen, they give you for cheap or for free, depending, if you go to one of their training sessions, they will give you a class set of their materials, and a lot of it is free online as well. But I know we had some early discussions about a textbook, and myself and Mr. Dixon visited Plymouth on Monday to look at the teachers that have been doing this project, the syllabus for a few years now, and they weren't really enamored by the choices of textbooks out there, and there's a lot of great websites and great resources as well that, rather than invest in a textbook, that we're kind of looking into.
Thank you, great.
Ms. Stout?
I really love the presentation that you gave about the importance of government and physics. I think that's true at any grade. So if I have this correctly, the world history from 500 to 1700, I mean, eventually there's going to be so much history that we have to do away with some of that. So that's going to be kind of put on the back burner or lower grades. And then we'll be moving forward to this at 8th grade. And where was, since Project Citizen's being done, how is it being done now?
So now it's a collaboration between ELA and social studies teachers on each team. They really focus on it in the 4th term, but there's many ways you can do this. If you're running a civics class, you can, what I did one year was every Friday we would, so one of the very first parts of Project Citizen is really identifying the problem you're going to study, and you really whittle it down from 40 or 50 projects, have the students do some research. So I kind of spearheaded it every Friday. You kind of use current events as well in that model, and then by the 4th term, getting ready for that state showcase up in Boston in June. It was really kind of all hands on deck 4th term, and it's a real, and the project itself, it checks every one of the 21st century learning skills boxes as far as collaboration, oral presentation.
This will be different, I don't know what you call them, objectives than will be done at 12th grade government.
Correct, and also all of our students entering 8th grade will get them.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think this is a wonderful start. This is good, and I really like that the emphasis now at middle school and grade 8 seems to have a lot of inclusion of project things that sort of makes this, what the kids are learning, come alive.
Well, I didn't always have great students at Plymouth, but I had one class that were kind of disengaged, and they felt kind of disenfranchised with the regular history class. But when we brought Project Citizen, and they knew that they could impact policy and tell the adults and question the adults, they just went with it, and they turned out to be the most effusive and persuasive group, and they won the state showcase. So it definitely, it really pulls in some of those other students.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Duval?
Not necessarily about the 8th grade, but this is the time of year that we, the people, compete. Do we have a team going?
I know Mr. Bates was taking his mock trial team, and I don't know about Mr. Hoffman-Terry. Yeah, I haven't seen them head out yet, but you're right, it's right around this time. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? Right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, next up on our agenda is an FY19 budget discussion. Is that Ms. Isernio with Mr. Carpenter?
So we have the Harwich Selectmen's meeting is coming up on Monday, this coming Monday, the 29th, where we will have our first public presentation of the budget to one of our select boards and finance committees. So what we've done is taken the budget presentation that we had in your packets last week and just sort of trimmed down to some of the salient things that have changed between now and then. The big things that have changed budget-wise between now and then is, as you know, yesterday the governor was releasing his budget, and that every year informs our budget. And when that budget presentation comes out, there are two areas in our budget that we'll just kind of point out here in a minute that change. First, there's Chapter 70, the amount of state aid that we get, but there's also a recalculation of wealth factors in the two communities. So part of the statutory funding that goes on is there's a minimum required contribution that each town is supposed to come up with, and that minimum required contribution is based partly on the wealth of the residents of the community and partly on the property values within the community. So one of the driving factors behind our budget is where that wealth factor falls, and it will shift back and forth depending if one of the towns is having a better fiscal year than the other towns. And good news for Harwich is that Harwich appears, as we get into these slides, to be having a better fiscal forecast relative to Chatham. So there's a shift in the minimum contribution shifting towards Harwich. Challenges for our budget is we were trying to back into a number to get the to have an assessment percentage to our towns based on Harwich. So when Harwich has to pay more, when you're backing into that number, that means we have to go and use additional reserves to get there. So we'll kind of explain how this all plays out before Steve strokes out on me on the amount of excess and deficiency that we may have to use to go and come in where where we want to for our towns. So as I said, Chapter 70 is the state funding. Important parts to keep in mind with state funding is what that minimum contribution is, and it shifts. The other big thing that has come in since last we presented is we had been carrying a conservative 15% increase for health insurance. That has, they had the vote for the Cape Cod Municipal Health Group, and that has come in at 6%. My understanding is it came in at 6% without them needing to use additional reserves. It apparently has been a good year in terms of claims against the money. So so it being at 6% doesn't mean that the out years look bad for us. So so that 6% is a significant budget. It has a significant budget impact here. So other than that, everything else on our budget assumptions have remained the same from when last we presented. What we have been trying to do is to make sure that the assessment increase for our towns stays just below 4%. To back into that 4% number, we would need to use $870,000 of excess and deficiency. Depending on how the state budget actually plays out, this could be a little bit less than $870,000. So in those assumptions, we're level funding Chapter 70 state aid. The governor's numbers actually have state aid going up by about 100,000. So presuming state aid comes up by 100,000, it means that we'll be able to use less of the reserves to get to the number that we want to be at. So that amount of excess and deficiency will, as more factors become known, and after the budget moves from the governor to the House and Senate, things will kind of get locked in more and more as things go on. There's a slide, just a slide on the difference between the budget and the assessment. So the budget's how much it takes to run the schools, but depending on how much of our reserves that we're using or how much of Chapter 70 aids coming in from the state, those things will impact what the bill or the assessment is to the towns to run their schools. In the assessment drivers, as I mentioned, the minimum required contribution swung in what was released by the state towards Harwich. So there's an increase in that minimum required contribution for both towns, but a significantly higher increase for Harwich. And again, the reason for that is, at least in this fiscal year, the state's looking at fiscal factors that are impacting Harwich as being more favorable, relatively speaking, than for Chatham. So where this impacts our budget and some other decisions that have been done behind the scenes on this. One of the things that we clearly heard last time we came before this board is that there was a want to see us tangibly fund stabilization. So in this, we are funding stabilization and putting $50,000 towards stabilization. So it will have a line in the budget. It does mean, we'll get into a couple other slides, it means that this committee is going to have a vote, then that both select boards will have to have a vote to allow us to fund stabilization, but it would provide an account that we would start to grow, that if we have capital needs that need to get addressed middle of a budget year, there is a reserve that we can go to do those. Or if we could look at that stabilization long-term, we could grow that account and down the road, when there is a roof that needs to get replaced, the cost of that roof on the towns could be less. We could use some money out of that stabilization to help defray those costs. So it's a good thing to do, is to grow that reserve. So difference between last time we presented and now, there's $50,000 that's going towards that stabilization. There's now a 6% health insurance that's built into this. You'll notice that there's more excess and deficiency that's being used here, with the understood caveat that in the budget assumption, we're level funding state aid, but the governor's numbers came out saying that there should actually be some more state aid there. So that amount of excess and deficiency is a little more than I'd prefer to see us using in this fiscal year, and my hope is that that governor's number is going to come in close to what it is, and that we'll be able to see us using less of the reserve because there'd be more money flowing in from the state. So we would see that Chapter 70 line going up, which would allow us to bring the excess and deficiency line down. But at the end of the day, the punchline for our two towns is we're staying with a total assessment increase for Harwich just below 4%. And last time when we presented, the Chatham assessment increase was slightly above 4%, but it has now actually fallen slightly below Harwich's, because of that minimum required contribution shift that happened upwards in the budget, if that makes any sense to anyone.
Crystal clear.
And then the last slides, just to reiterate, stabilization. We will need to bring to this committee for a vote to establish a stabilization line and account. We will need to go and bring to each select board a vote to allow the school district to create a stabilization account. And then, as I said, there's $50,000 that has now been built in as a line item in this budget to go and fund that stabilization. And again, it's for only things that you would otherwise, that are capital projects that you would otherwise borrow for, that you could go access those funds. So it could be something like one of the special education vans that we have. It breaks down, it dies. You've got something that in the middle of a fiscal year you could actually go to and do that, or keep funding that. And we had talked last time at our last school committee meeting, at each year, if there's money left in our capital line at the end of a budget cycle, that we would take the excess in that capital line and keep moving it each year into that stabilization account. So we would do that above and beyond the $50,000 that we're funding as a line item in this, to ideally grow stabilization over time. And when we do have big capital projects, to help dampen the cost of those on our two towns. I think that would be a summary of the budget. And as I said, there will be the full enchilada will be presented to the Harvest Selectmen Monday evening. I will also be stealing 3 slides from Mr. Burkhead's presentation before the administrators this past week on just some really good academic data, both in terms of graduation rates and state testing, that has ticked up progressively over the last 3 years, just to really remind our select boards that that spending money on education is money well spent, and we keep having this district heading in positive directions.
Questions, Ms. Richardson?
All right, just for my own benefit to try to make sense here. The stabilization is one fund for both towns, correct?
So, right, so it's akin to, it's an account that you can go to, so it's, excess and deficiency is a reserve that the district has.
I get that.
So currently, the reason that we feel comfortable using a little more excess and deficiency than we typically would in a fiscal year is that we've grown that account to 5% 2 years faster than what we were anticipating getting to, so that we've got some capacity to use a little bit more out of that account. Excess and deficiency, you can only use it when you're going into a budgeting cycle. Stabilization is for those capital things that that could be they could be planned things, like we're going to build this stabilization reserve to help defray the costs of roofs that we know are out there in the 5-year plan. But it could also be, if we have a truck for the district that pushes snow when we have a winter event, and 1 year it goes, there's a spot to go deal with that unanticipated large budget item that you can go to within a fiscal year without having to go back to each select board to pay for that capital item.
Just to follow up, the example you gave about a roof of a school, I thought we decided that capital improvements like that would be the responsibility of the town.
Well, they ultimately are the responsibility of the town, but this would allow us to, when we have to do something like that, to potentially use some of those funds to when it becomes the responsibility of the town, it shows up in the assessment number. So it would allow us to help dampen an assessment increase within a fiscal year. So So right now, we're trying and we're using pretty aggressively using excess and deficiency in this budget to make sure that we keep that number below 4% for our towns. And you could imagine if we have a big roofing project, it could cause that number to go up. But if you've been planning for big capital projects, you can use some of that money to, again, keep that total assessment to the towns at a more reasonable amount.
Thank you.
Mr. Russell?
Just to clarify also, probably for myself, I'm just not finding it here. Clearly, the health bill is real good news. In this sheet right here where it says, and I may be mixing metaphors with the assessment figure, at 3.99, which gets us right on the under the edge of 4%. Does that line item show up as including a 6% increase of health insurance?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yep.
Ms. Stout?
All I wanted to know is on Monday when the selectmen's meeting, what time is that? That's at town hall, right?
6?
I'm assuming 6 o'clock.
It's 6.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions about the FY19 budget? All right.
Just quick, since we're talking
Mr. Carpenter.
assessment, one of the things that they'll also ask Katie and I, and we'll prepare some slides, is just looking out 5 years, if we roll up contracts or and if we roll up the capital projects that we expect. So every year when we do our budget presentation, we also sort of give a 5-year outlook on where we see the costs. And so far we've been actually tracking pretty well with that 5-year, what our real budget is and what that projection is. So that'll be some other information that I'm sure that will be asked about. And then there's something else that shows up on this agenda that the selectmen are asking us to come and talk about, which is what are the changes that we're recommending to the regional agreement, which is part of the vote and discussion a little bit later in the meeting.
Please cadets. All right, so now we will move on to our next item, which is approval of maintenance contracts, which I assume, Ms. Isernia, you're going to jump right back up.
We've taken the strategy of wanting to have, go out to bid for different trades, people to be the go-to people in the district. Last year, if you remember, we awarded a contract to Cazalt to be our roof maintenance and preventive maintenance and repair contractor. So we went out to bid to, I want to just get my notes, excuse me. In addition to the network infrastructure and wireless upgrade, we also went out to bid for licensed electrician services, licensed plumber services, and rooftop unit preventive maintenance and repair for the 3 schools except for the high school, because the high school is under contract with the train until 2019, and then we'll go out for a bid that way. This way, there are, as I mentioned before, Massachusetts procurement laws about how much money you can spend with a certain vendor without going out to bid and then having projects, et cetera. So we went out to bid with the help of Rick Travers, setting up the biggest key is getting that scope of service outlined so you know just what it is that you're needing the services for. And we've had some successful submittals, and I'd like to make the recommendation, which I sent out in all of the packets. We had 2 submissions for our licensed electrician services. We had 2 bid submissions for our plumbing services, and we had 4 bid submissions for our rooftop units and preventive maintenance. And the low bidder for the licensed electrician services is Len Callback and his services would be $80 an hour for all services for all 3 years of the contract. And we asked everybody to price us a rate for your regular Monday through Friday, also a rate if we were going to have work done, scheduled work done on the weekends or after school hours, because sometimes some of the work you don't want kids in the building. And then we also asked for an emergency rate, and so his rate was the same. So I would recommend the awarding the contract to Mr. Callback for our licensed electrician services. I'm going to just keep going.
Sure.
Okay. We also had 2 bid submissions for our licensed plumber services, and I'm recommending that we award it to Bosco Industrial Corp. They're out of Mattapoisett, and they provided rates $95 an hour for year 1, $100 an hour for years 2 and 3 of the contract. Those are all the routine services, and $142.50 an hour year 1, and $150 an hour years 2 and 3 for after-hour and emergency services. They were the low bid. I'm familiar, they've done some work with in the district currently, and I'm also familiar with them when I was at Old Rochester in Mattapoisett. And then we had 4 bid submissions for the rooftop units, preventive maintenance and repairs. And this is something that will definitely help Rick Travers sleep well at night with all of the freezing cold weather and everything. We had 4 bids, and we had mechanical air controls with a low bidder, and the same thing as the electrician services. They came in with $97 an hour for all services, for all types of services for the 3 years. And I've checked references on everybody. The mechanical air controls also does the buildings for the town of Chatham, and everybody's references were good. So those are the recommendations. And when we went out to bid, we were wanting the contracts, as we presented them, to be awarded on or around February 1st, which is why I was asked if I could get this on, just in case we needed somebody's services in the meantime.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Would anybody care to make a motion? Mr. Duvall.
I move that we award 3-year contracts to the following areas. Licensed electrician services to Len Callback, licensed plumber services to Bosco Industrial Corp., and the rooftop unit preventative maintenance and repair to Mechanical Air Control.
Second. Thank you. Any discussion, questions? Ms. Stout?
Just a question, Katie. On this decision that we're making here, that's not going to create more work. That's just covering the work by those certain people, and it doesn't give them any benefits or anything else that is more of an expense.
No, we just contract for the hourly services that we do. Many of them we're using already.
Yes.
But with the state, you can only spend so much a year with a vendor, and then you get into that you need to do either quoting or bids. So this way we'll have more flexibility. So if there was something else that came up, we would have a vendor already on retainer.
Thank you.
The contract.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That is unanimous. Thank you. And next up is subcommittee reports, which we have none. Superintendent's report, Mr. Carpenter.
Just in your packets, there's a flyer for the annual Cape Cod Collaborative Legislative Breakfast, which will be 2 weeks from tomorrow, Friday, February 9th, at the Collaborative on Bumps River Road, beginning at 9:30. So you will likely see Senator Sear there, along with the other Cape legislators. There'll be a presentation by Rob Curtin from DESE on the new district accountability levels. So currently districts are ranked as being 1 through 5, and there's a complete overhaul on how that accountability system is going to be operating in the state. I was at a presentation just on Wednesday by Rob Curtin, and it's worth hearing how the changes will impact how communities view sort of the rating of their school relative to others. So there's sort of a major overhaul that's happening there when it comes to the state. We finished our round of each of the principals sort of doing a little monthly data presentation of their schools. So Mr. Burkhead and the high school was sort of the last one to sort of share sort of beginning of the school year data from their school. And next month, the admin team will be going back to look at mid-year reports out from each of the schools. So we'll kind of go through the same order. So Chatham Elementary School will be first on the agenda, followed by Harwich Elementary School the following month. And what we'll see is I'll ask each of the principals after they present to our team to come and do a little mid-year report out to you on data trends that they're seeing and sort of some good positive news on the teaching and learning that's happening in each of their buildings. And then last, tomorrow morning, we have sort of an interesting thing that's happening. WGBH is coming down to do a little story on start times at the elementary schools in our district. So they'll be over at Harwich Elementary School doing some soundscaping as the kids are arriving and talking to some teachers and some parents on how's an earlier start time for younger kids going, and then talking to some of the school administrators on what's the data look like, and are there some trends there that we can talk about. So more to come. That's it for me.
All right. Any questions for Mr. Carpenter? All right, moving on. The last thing on our agenda is to vote to approve the updated regional agreement that we brought up last week. It is the intention to vote on it tonight so that we can then pass it along to our town's boards of selectmen for their approval so that it can be put onto the warrant for our spring town meetings for their approval. So before we do a discussion, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the regional agreement that we have in front of us in draft form. Mr. Russell.
I would move that we approve the draft version of the regional agreement reviewed by all of us on this date.
Thank you. And a second? Second. Thank you. Discussion, questions, comments? Mr. Duvall.
I just think we need to really stress and point out to everybody that this, if we approve this tonight, or when we approve this tonight, both boards of selectmen have a chance to make revisions and send it back.
Correct.
And we move on from there, and then it goes to both town meetings, and it's voted on there. So, our vote is really just to get it into the next level, which.
A recommendation. Our
Right.
vote is a
Our
recommendation
recommendation.
for what we would like to see as changes. Thank you for clarifying all of that. All right, seeing Mr. Russell.
Just a follow-up clarification, I can, it's page 4, the issue that raised so much of a point of discussion.
Yes, sir.
It mentions both boards of selectmen voting in favor or disfavor of the majority vote. Does it also state, I can't find it, that that our regional school committee would vote as a majority?
The school committee must vote to assign students on a basis other than town of residence and each town's board of selectmen by majority vote. This was, so it doesn't specifically say our school committee votes in a majority, and I think that in order for us to do anything, it has to be, but I also think the wording says by majority vote.
I think it's clear.
I would question it, other than the fact that I know our attorney has gone through that section specifically many times. So I think that it's safe to say that we're not gonna vote on something by less than a majority to pass a vote. Is that
is true.
logical? Okay, thank you. All right, so although we have a motion and a second on the table, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ms. Stout's opposed. Any abstentions? And so the motion carries. Thank you. And, oh, I apologize. We have one more thing on our agenda. We need to adjourn into an executive session to discuss an MREA Unit A Level 3 grievances coming out for adjournment only. Would anybody care to make a motion?
We'll move.
Thank you. Second? Second. Thank you. Roll call vote. Ms. Richardson?
Aye.
Mr. Crappy?
Aye.
Ms. Sheehan? Aye. Ms. Long?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Ms. Stout?
Aye.
Mr. Duvall?
Aye.
And the chair says aye. Thank you very much.
Good night, all. Thank you.